My name is Lindsay Alico, and I'm a board certified genetic counselor. I'm also a clinical assistant professor at the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences at the University at Buffalo. And I'm excited to be our first program director for the master's program in genetic counseling. And I'm excited to tell you more about that, as well as our profession. So, what is genetic counseling? As defined by our national society, the National Society of Genetic Counselors, genetic counseling is the process of helping people understand and adapt to the medical, psychological, and familial implications of genetic contributions to disease. So, what does that actually mean, and what does it look like in practice? What do we do? So, a big part of the job is just simply communicating information about genetics. Genetics is complex and it's difficult for many people to understand. So we're especially trained to talk with them about that, to make sure they understand the genetic inheritance of the condition running through their family, to make sure they understand the potential features of that condition running through their family, to understand the medical management options that might be available to them. We also gather personal and family medical histories. And the purpose of that, and to be so thorough with it, is because we use that information to do a risk assessment. We are basically trying to figure out what is the chance that the individual in front of us has this genetic condition that they are potentially at risk for. What's the risk for them? What's the risk that they inherited from their mother or from their father? What's the risk to their siblings? And so we spend a lot of time gathering information about our patients in order to provide an accurate assessment and to determine if the individual is eligible for genetic testing. So genetic testing is not a required part of the genetic counseling process, but a lot of the patients that we speak with are eligible. And so we talk with them about the risks, benefits, limitations of testing, what are the possible test results you could get back, and how would any of those test results change the way that your doctor takes care of you. And then we help them decide. Genetic testing is not always recommended by genetic counselors in the way that a doctor might recommend a certain medical test. But we really want people to know, hey, this is an option for you. And is taking this test going to make sense for you and your family? Does the information that you're going to get fit in with your belief system and your values? And what are the potential actions you might take as a result of getting these results? And so we spend a lot of time understanding people's values and helping them make these really difficult choices. These tests, in a lot of ways, are predictive. Sometimes people are figuring out something about themselves that is in their genes that they haven't yet anticipated. If someone chooses genetic testing, then we help them interpret the genetic test results. We want them to know what it means for them and their family. We also want to make sure that their doctors who referred them to us understand the genetic test results as well. And we're going to provide support to those referring providers, as well as to that patient, and of course, their families. So I thought I would tell you a little bit more about my journey to becoming a genetic counselor educator. That is my full-time job, to teach genetic counseling students and to teach medical students at the Jacobs School. But I have had other roles, and so I'll kind of backtrack a little to the very beginning, which was in 10th grade, when I learned about genetic counseling in a genetics elective. And my biology teacher at the time told us about it, and I thought, hey, this is really interesting. I can picture myself doing this. But I was in 10th grade, and so I wasn't yet ready to make a decision necessarily about my future. But I tucked it in the back of my mind. I pursued, applying to undergraduate universities, and I ended up at the University of Rochester, and I studied genetics there because I still liked it. I was really interested in the topic. And around my junior year, I started to think, hey, what am I going to do after I graduate? And so I remembered genetic counseling as a potential career option. And I went home to Buffalo and shadowed the genetic counselors working at Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center. And that experience, it was a full summer and fall semester, really solidified for me that this is something that I could picture myself doing. And so I pursued a graduate degree in genetic counseling right after my undergraduate degree. My first job was as a clinical cancer genetic counselor. And not that my career is terribly interesting so much as I think it highlights that genetic counselors can fill many different roles. I think when people first hear of genetic counseling, they picture it in a clinical context, but there are other things that you can do with the genetic counseling skill set. So like I said, I started in a clinical cancer role. So I was working in a breast center, and I primarily saw patients who were diagnosed with breast cancer and had one other kind of feature along with that was unusual. So maybe they had breast cancer diagnosed at a young age, under 50, or maybe they had breast cancer, but there was also 2 other people in their family who had breast cancer. Both of those scenarios are pretty unusual. And so when we see that, we start to wonder what could be causing this. Is there a hereditary component? And so those are the people that I saw in that setting. And then from there, I moved on to an industry role. I worked for a genetic testing laboratory, but as a medical specialist. So I was out in the community. I met with different providers like OBGYNs, GI docs, internal med. And I helped them basically identify patients who could be at risk for hereditary cancer in their practices. So I spent a lot of time training them and their office staff on some of these red flags for genetic risk. And we created protocols for referring these high-risk patients to where they needed to go to get the genetic testing that might help us learn more about their risk for cancer. And all the while I was working as a clinical counselor and then in this industry role, I was training students in some capacity. I started as a supervisor of clinical rotations, and then I started teaching a little bit on the side as adjunct faculty. But in 2017, I fully transitioned to education full-time, and I worked at Sarah Lawrence College for a long time on their leadership team of the genetic counseling program. And I came to UB in 2023, and I'm so excited to be here to help build this new program in Western New York. So just a bit more about the field of genetic counseling. It remains a fast-growing field. Since 2006, the number of genetic counselors has more than doubled, and the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics predicts that it will continue to grow at a rate of about 9% through 2034. And as I understand it, a 9% growth rate is much higher than average. Most professions are around just maybe a 3% growth rate. The average salary is over $100,000 for a full-time genetic counselor. And this data comes from the professional status survey that our National Society of Genetic Counselors does. And this data was last gathered and published in 2024. So they do it every 2 years. So we're anxiously awaiting the next round of salary data. So you can imagine that the salary has probably increased somewhat since this data was collected. I mention these numbers because grad school is certainly an investment. And I think it's important for people to know that once they get this degree, they are in a great position to get a job that is going to pay well and help them pay back some of those inevitable student loans. On top of the financial, issues with the field, I should say that people tend to like this role. So our professional status survey shows high satisfaction with the field, that genetic counselors feel that there is growth, that there is a career ladder for them to move through. There's a good work-life balance, and the genetic counseling profession has been ranked in the past as a top 10 best healthcare support job. So what does our program actually look like? This is a 62 credit program, and it's completed in 21 months. So that's 2 years of graduate school with the intervening summer, 5 semesters altogether. And there's 3 main components. These 62 credits are divided into coursework, fieldwork, and the master's thesis project. And this is a formal master's thesis project. Students will ultimately produce a written manuscript and do a public oral defensive thesis prior to graduation. But to expand a bit more on the coursework credits are also grouped into 3 categories. So we've got the life sciences and genetics core. That's your human genetics, your medical genetics, your core science classes. We've got the genetic counseling core. That's 4 courses, 1 in each of the main semesters. And then we've got the cross-disciplinary discussion-based courses. And I want to highlight those because I think they're the most unique if you compare our program to others. These courses also run as threads throughout the 2 years, and they involve faculty not just from the Jacobs School of Medicine, but from 7 other academic units throughout UB. So you'll learn about, for example, genetic discrimination from a law professor instead of from me, right? Because that's not my primary area of expertise. You might learn about healthcare communication, how to break down complex topics from faculty from the Graduate School of Education. You might learn about psychosocial support from a social worker. And so I think this is, I trained in a program where mostly all my courses were taught by genetic counselors, and it was a wonderful experience for me at the time. But I'm really excited to see what this will be like to truly have this cross-disciplinary training program. And finally, fieldwork, just to expand a little bit more on that. It would be possible for someone to do all of the clinical rotations that they need in the Buffalo area. So we have our core fieldwork sites listed on our website if you want to learn more about what those sites are. But we also have some flexibility if there are people who maybe want to train somewhere else in the summer, or who want to pursue more of an elective opportunity, whether it's at a testing laboratory, things like that. So there is flexibility in the fieldwork plan. So the curriculum that I just mentioned was all planned around the practice-based competencies for genetic counselors. These are published by the Accreditation Council for Genetic Counseling, and all genetic counseling programs have to ensure that their curriculum is supporting the development of student proficiency in these practice-based competencies. So they are organized into 7 categories, which are listed here. And so we will certainly ensure that you are prepared to graduate and sit for your board examination in genetic counseling, which requires, like I said, competence in all these areas. But another thing I wanted to mention is again, just to come back to the idea that not all of these skills are for a clinical setting. We're also going to make sure that you can practice and apply these skills in other settings, that you'd be prepared for an industry role, for a marketing role, for a role in policy. So we're going to take a look at all these different areas throughout the training. We're also going to make sure that you're prepared to practice in all of the different specialty areas: prenatal, pediatrics, oncology, other adult, like neurogenetics and cardiogenetics. And we're going to make sure you're exposed to a wide range of service delivery modes. So some genetic counselors in our area only see patients face-to-face, while there are others who incorporate telemedicine visits into their practice. So to expand a bit more on the thesis project, I want to highlight that we are building on the legacy that UB has as the leading public research university in New York State. But until now, UB has not so much contributed to the growing body of evidence in genetic counseling. So we hope that through the master's program and through the student thesis projects, we can now start having UB create new knowledge to guide our future genetic counseling practice. And this will really begin in the first year spring semester. And this is through a course called Thesis Research 1. And students will be guided by faculty through kind of the whole research process. So to understand the research process from start to finish and begin to brainstorm different ideas for their thesis projects. So they will, by the end of the course, understand how to evaluate and apply the literature to create a research proposal. They will also, with the help of their faculty, choose a thesis committee, and that's going to begin with a thesis mentor. That's the person who's going to be the most hands-on in helping you complete your project. The committee will also include one member of the program leadership team. So that might be the program director, assistant program director, or medical director. And then one other faculty member who has relevant expertise. And in addition to the thesis mentorship, which I will expand upon, I want to make sure students understand that there will be consistent and structured support provided throughout the 2 years in the program. And that begins with the program mentor. So one member of the program leadership team will be assigned to each student in the cohort. And there will be academic progress meetings scheduled in each semester. And of course, there can be other meetings sprinkled throughout as issues come up for you. But we do want to make sure that students can rely on regular checkpoints that are pre-planned throughout their academic journey. There will also be an additional progress meeting that's specific to fieldwork at the end of the summer internship. And that's a good opportunity for students to reflect with the program mentor on the summer, what they learned, and to set goals for increasing their participation in fieldwork encounters throughout the second year and leading up to graduation. So to expand again a bit more on the thesis mentor, this is essentially the chair of the student's thesis committee, and they are also going to schedule regular meetings with the student. The first major planning meeting will occur at the start of the summer, and the first major progress meeting will occur at the end of the summer. So in that intervening summer, students are spending quite a lot of time on fieldwork and thesis work, and there aren't any formal courses scheduled. And then, as I mentioned previously, the thesis project will conclude with a formal defense, and that thesis mentor and other committee members will be present for that as well. So what are the types of students we are looking for? Of course, we would like to attract students with strong undergraduate academics. So we want to make sure students have a strong foundation, particularly in science and in genetics, and that they're prepared for graduate level science courses. We also want students to have some sort of exposure to the genetic counseling profession. But for me, it's more about the quality of that exposure than the quantity. So we're really looking to see, what did you learn about the profession throughout these experiences? What insight do you have into the profession? How, what makes you see yourself here as a genetic counselor? So we hope that applicants can speak to that, especially in their personal statement. We're also looking for people with research experience. Although it's not required to apply to the program, I think it's helpful because genetic counselors need to have a foundation in critical thinking. They need to, know how they would approach a problem and to help others solve a problem. And so to kind of have that logical flow leading to decision making, I think is an important quality to have. And so research experience, although it's not the only way, helps us assess that. Next, we'd like to see a commitment to helping others. This might come in the form of advocacy work. This might come in the form of some sort of healthcare work. Crisis counseling is a popular way that students demonstrate this commitment to helping others. But we basically want to know that the applicant has had some sort of experience helping people through crisis or a difficult time, because this is something that genetic counselors do frequently. We are also looking for strong written and verbal communication skills, and I would add to that interpersonal skills. And finally, capacity for growth. So we hope that our future genetic counseling master students will be partners with us as we continue to build and improve this new master's program. We also hope that we attract lifelong learners who will continue to pursue development as working professionals. So very exciting. This is the first genetic counseling program in SUNY. And so we really wanted to do it right, to lay a strong foundation. And this program has been in development for many years. And I think the place where we've arrived at is a really unique approach to training. There are many, many new courses that were developed just for this master's program. And we know that genetic counseling students will benefit from those courses. And we hope that other graduate students at UB will also join you and take some of those cross-disciplinary and even genetics courses with you, which would be a really fun way to share ideas with people coming from a slightly different lens. We also plan to continue to have fairly small cohorts. This is a good way to make use of clinical training resources to make sure that all of our graduates have equitable exposure to the different types of cases that they'll need. And I think it's also a way to ensure that people will get very timely feedback because they will have a really close relationship with the program faculty, and a small cohort lends itself well to that. We also have been very intentional about the fieldwork involvement being very gradual. Students come to genetic counseling programs with such varied levels of experience. And so we want to make sure that we can tailor the fieldwork experience to you, no matter where you're starting from. And so in the first year, we plan to start with students role-playing, practicing skills with their peers in the first semester. In the second semester, we plan to have students role play and practice their skills with standardized patients in our simulation center. And then it's not until the summer where students will practice those skills with real live patients under the supervision of a board certified genetic counselor in clinic. And then, of course, continue to increase participation in sessions throughout the second year. And finally, another unique thing about our program is our close ties to the Interprofessional Practice and Education Office at UB. This is a group that brings together leadership from all of the health sciences programs at UB. And so I've really enjoyed being a part of this group, and I interact with people from athletic training, from medicine, from pharmacy, from speech language pathology, occupational therapy, you name it, physician assistant students from Canisius. And so this has been a great experience that I'm excited for students to participate in. They will essentially, along with their genetic counseling coursework, they will also participate in these interprofessional activities, and they will earn at the end of it a micro-credential in interprofessional collaborative practice. And so this will not be an additional cost. It won't be, a huge addition of workload, but we want to make sure that our graduates have a stamp of approval on their CV when they graduate and they're going out into the job world that says, we've really learned with hands-on experience how to be part of a multidisciplinary team. And I think employers will really see a benefit in that. So to conclude, why are we here? Why is there this new master's program in genetic counseling? It's really because we hope that by increasing access to genomic medicine, we can improve the health of New Yorkers and Western New Yorkers in particular. The number of genetic counselors practicing in Western New York and even Central New York is really small relative to the number of genetic counselors who are downstate. And so we believe that if we, through this training program, can grow the genetic counselor workforce in New York State, then there will be more patients who have access to this really important clinical genetic service and to their genomic information that could improve their health. We also know that our students will make an impact in the community. They'll do this through an outreach project or advocacy project in their first semester as part of their fieldwork training. And we hope they'll also do this through research projects that engage the community in participatory research. And finally, we are through the program, and we hope our graduates will as well. We are advocating for the recognition of genetic counselors locally across New York State and nationally. We are advocating for licensure of genetic counselors in New York State, and specifically adding genetic counselors as providers to Medicare. And I'm sure there will be more and more opportunities to advocate in the future as we grow our genetic counseling community and want to make sure that every patient who needs us can come see us. So thank you so much for learning more about the Genetic Counseling Master's Program at UB. And I look forward to hearing more from each of you soon.